A gemstone can sit in the market for years, handled, traded, even admired, without anyone realizing what it truly is. Then something changes. Not the chemistry, not the crystal structure, not the mine it came from, just information. A lab report tightens a definition. A statistic becomes public. A single-source deposit is understood to be finite. A classification shifts, and almost overnight, the same stone begins behaving differently. Prices separate, categories shrink, collectors recalibrate. This is not speculation. It is perception moving faster than geology. Today, 10 rare gemstones, not because they were newly discovered, not because they suddenly became beautiful, but because the market understood something new about them. And by the time that understanding spread, value had already moved. Stay until the end, because the stone at number 1 did not change due to hype, grading, or mind control. It changed because the numbers became impossible to ignore. Ranked 10th, red beryl. For decades, it sat in plain geological silence. Found in the Wah Wah Mountains of Utah, red beryl did not arrive with spectacle. It did not glow under ultraviolet light. It did not shift color dramatically. It did not carry royal mythology or imperial symbolism. It was simply there, a beryllium aluminum silicate crystal infused with trace amounts of manganese, forming in volcanic rhyolite under conditions so specific that replication elsewhere has proven almost non-existent. And yet for years it remained undervalued. Not because it was abundant, not because it lacked rarity, but because it lacked recognition. Red beryl's formation conditions are so narrow that only one primary commercial locality has ever produced it in meaningful quantities. Unlike emerald, which shares the same mineral family, red beryl requires an environment both rich in beryllium and chemically compatible with manganese, a geological coincidence that rarely aligns. But geology alone does not move markets. Awareness does. The shift began quietly. Gemological institutions began documenting verified crystal counts. Trade publications started referencing its scarcity in measurable terms. Collectors realized something uncomfortable. Gem-quality red beryl was rarer than many stones marketed as elite. When the market understood that supply was not merely low, but geographically constrained to a single American deposit, perception adjusted. And when perception adjusts, pricing follows. There was no new discovery, no mine collapse, no dramatic auction headline, just a recalibration of understanding. Dealers who once treated red beryl as a curiosity began treating it as a statistical outlier. The overnight change was not explosive, it was corrective. That distinction matters. Red beryl represents one of the purest examples of how value can shift not from hype, but from clarity. The stone did not become rarer. The market simply stopped underestimating it. Even today, many outside specialized collecting circles remain unaware of how constrained its supply truly is. And that creates an interesting tension. Can a gemstone be objectively rare while still being psychologically overlooked? That question sits at the core of red beryl's story, because sometimes the most powerful shifts in value do not happen when the earth reveals something new. They happen when people finally notice what was already there. If this were placed beside emerald, ruby, or even Paraiba tourmaline without labels, would its rarity alone justify greater attention? Or does recognition always lag behind geology? Curiosity often begins where familiarity ends, and red beryl is a reminder that rarity does not announce itself loudly. It waits. Ranked 9th, Grandidierite. Some gemstones are born rare. Others become valuable the moment they are seen. Grandidierite belonged to the first category for most of its existence, and the second only recently. First identified in Madagascar in the early 20th century, Grandidierite was known primarily as a mineralogical curiosity. Its bluish-green to teal coloration, caused by iron within its crystal structure, gave it visual appeal, but not commercial momentum. For decades, most known specimens were opaque or heavily included. Transparent facetable material was so scarce that many collectors assumed it effectively did not exist. And in markets, what is assumed not to exist rarely commands serious attention. That changed when gem-quality transparent Grandidierite began appearing in measurable, documentable quantities. Still extraordinarily limited, but no longer hypothetical. High-profile auctions and international trade shows placed it under controlled lighting, in vitrines normally reserved for established elite stones. Visibility did what geology alone never could. Collectors who had spent decades studying rare species suddenly confronted a material they had never handled. Laboratories confirmed refractive indices. Reports formalized identity. Market language shifted from rare mineral to rare gemstone. The overnight shift was not in chemistry, it was in exposure. Once transparent specimens were photographed, cataloged, and sold publicly, pricing recalibrated. Dealers adjusted from curiosity pricing to rarity tier positioning. A stone once known mainly within mineralogical circles began entering high-end collector conversations. That moment, when something moves from obscurity into shared awareness, often creates the sharpest psychological shift in value. Grandidierite did not flood the market. It did not gain mass popularity. It simply crossed a threshold, from invisible to visible. And visibility in rare gemstones can be catalytic. The fascinating part is this. Total supply did not change dramatically. Extraction conditions in Madagascar remained limited. Production did not suddenly scale. But once the market could quantify that gem-quality material existed and how little of it there was, pricing logic aligned with geological reality. The market did not discover more Grandidierite. It discovered how little there truly was. That subtle difference matters, because rarity that hides in obscurity stays undervalued. Rarity that steps into light forces recalculation. A question naturally emerges. How many other gemstones remain overlooked simply because they have not yet had their visibility moment? Recognition is often the final ingredient in value, and for Grandidierite, that ingredient arrived almost overnight. Ranked 8th, Musgravite. Some value shifts are driven by excitement. Musgravite changed because of correction. For years, certain stones circulating quietly in specialized collections were believed to be another rare species, Taphite. Their color ranged from grayish-violet to muted green, occasionally with subtle brown undertones. They were scarce, yes, but not yet extraordinary in the eyes of the trade. The difference was invisible to the naked eye. Only under laboratory analysis did the distinction emerge. Slight variations in chemical composition, structural differences at the crystallographic level, subtle shifts in refractive properties. These stones were not Taphite at all. They were Musgravite. That reclassification did something powerful. It separated a handful of specimens from an already rare category into an even narrower one. What had been rare became rarer than assumed, not because the Earth produced less, but because science refined the label. Musgravite's formation requires a geochemical coincidence involving magnesium, aluminum, and beryllium under highly specific metamorphic conditions. Known sources, primarily in Australia and later in a few scattered localities, yielded only minimal gem-quality material. Most crystals were small. Transparent, faceable specimens were exceptionally scarce, yet for years the market did not fully recognize how scarce. When laboratories confirmed the distinction and documentation spread through gemological circles, dealers were forced to reconsider inventory. Stones previously priced under one identity now belonged to another, a more constrained category. The shift was not dramatic in public headlines. It was surgical, quiet, precise. But in rare gemstones, precision can move value just as sharply as hype. Musgravite illustrates a different kind of overnight change, not driven by auction drama, not triggered by a mine closure, but by clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when measurement replaces assumption. It also reveals something deeper about rarity. Classification shapes perception. Two stones may look nearly identical to a collector. Yet if one belongs to a mineral species with fewer confirmed gem-quality specimens worldwide, the valuation logic shifts instantly. The stone did not change. The name did, and sometimes that is enough. An interesting question follows. If Musgravite had never been separated scientifically from Taphite, would its rarity feel less significant, even if the supply remained exactly the same? Value often depends not just on scarcity, but on how precisely scarcity is defined. Musgravite stands as proof that in the rare gemstone world, Knowledge itself can redraw the market overnight. Ranked 7th, black opal. Not every overnight value shift looks like a spike. Some look like a separation. Black opal has existed in the trade for generations, most famously from Lightning Ridge in Australia. At first glance, it does not appear rare in the way Painite or Musgravite does. Opal is widely known. It fills display cases. It appears in jewelry stores across price levels. But black opal is not simply opal. Its dark body tone creates a visual stage where spectral color can ignite with extraordinary intensity. The phenomenon, play of color, is not new. What changed was how the market began distinguishing between black opal and truly exceptional black opal. For years, quality variation blurred pricing logic. Stones with modest brightness and inconsistent color patterns sat in the same category as specimens displaying electric reds, rolling flash patterns, and rare full-spectrum fire. Buyers sensed differences, but formal tier separation was less rigid. Then grading language sharpened. Dealers, auction houses, and laboratories began defining body tone scales, brightness levels, and pattern classifications with greater precision. N. Ratings for darkness. Brightness, grading from faint to brilliant. Pattern terminology such as harlequin or broad flash. As criteria became clearer, something happened almost overnight. The top tier detached from the rest. Museum-grade black opal, stones with deep body tone and high intensity, stable red or multicolor fire, moved into a different economic stratosphere. Not because supply suddenly vanished, but because supply of that specific tier was quantified as extremely narrow. The market did not reprice black opal as a whole. It split it, and that split created a dramatic perception shift. Collectors who once compared black opal generally began evaluating it surgically. The difference between good and exceptional was no longer aesthetic opinion. It was categorized scarcity. This is a different kind of rarity story, not geological formation under impossible pressure, not scientific reclassification, but segmentation. When the highest quality tier becomes clearly defined, it often leaves the rest behind. Value concentrates at the top, and the definition of rare moves from species level to specimen level. Black opal reminds the market of something subtle but powerful. Rarity can exist within abundance. A material may be widely known, yet only a fraction of it meets the strictest visual and structural criteria. And when that fraction becomes visible, the divide can feel instantaneous. A quiet question lingers. How many stones sitting under the same name today are actually separated by invisible quality boundaries that the market has not yet fully priced in? Sometimes rarity is not about the stone itself. It is about which tier the stone belongs to. Ranked 6th, Padparadscha sapphire. No new mine closed. No deposit ran dry. No geological catastrophe forced scarcity. And yet, the available supply seemed to contract almost overnight. For years, the name Padparadscha traveled comfortably across a wide range of pink-orange sapphires. The description was poetic, inspired by the color of a lotus blossom. But poetry leaves room for interpretation. Orangey pinks entered the category. Pink sapphires with warmth were accepted. Slight brown modifiers were sometimes overlooked. Elastic definitions create elastic supply. Then the enforcement tightened. Major gemological laboratories began applying stricter chromatic boundaries. The balance between pink and orange had to be precise. Neither hue dominant. Saturation needed to remain delicate, not vivid. Brown undertones disqualified the claim. Reports became more cautious. Auction houses mirrored the standards. High-end dealers aligned quickly to avoid reputational risk. That alignment was the pivot. Within a short span, stones previously labeled Padparadscha were reassessed. Some were reclassified as pink sapphire, others as orangey sapphire. The name remained, but fewer stones were allowed to carry it. Physically, nothing vanished from the earth. Categorically, a significant portion of inventory disappeared. And when category shrinks, pricing logic adjusts immediately. Collectors began distinguishing far more sharply. True Padparadscha, that delicate equilibrium of pastel pink and soft orange, emerged as a visibly narrower tier. The market was no longer reacting to abundance within corundum. It was reacting to qualification within a definition. This was not hype, it was filtration at scale. The overnight change was not geological, it was institutional. A shared enforcement standard compressed supply without altering a single crystal underground. Padparadscha sapphire illustrates a powerful market principle. Rarity can intensify the moment boundaries become non-negotiable. When fewer stones meet the criteria, the premium concentrates automatically. The earth did not produce less. The rules simply allowed less to qualify. And in rare gemstones, that can be enough to reset value faster than any mine closure ever could. Ranked 5th, Alexandrite. Long before laboratories tightened definitions or mines announced closures, one detail quietly began to outweigh all others. Alexandrite was never an ordinary gemstone. Its ability to shift from greenish daylight tones to red under incandescent light made it one of the most dramatic optical phenomena in gemology. A chromium-rich variety of chrysoberyl, it became legendary for its color change, often described as emerald by day, ruby by night. But color change alone did not create the overnight shift. What changed was the weight given to where it came from. The earliest and most storied deposits lay in Russia's Ural Mountains. 19th century production was limited, and by the time modern gem markets matured, those original sources were effectively exhausted. For decades, however, origin documentation was inconsistent. Stones circulated globally. Some carried verified Russian provenance. Others did not. Then the market began separating them decisively. Auction houses started emphasizing documented Russian origin in catalog descriptions. Collectors began competing not merely for strong color change, but for historical lineage. Laboratories increased scrutiny around geographic determination. The phrase Russian Alexandrite shifted from descriptive detail to valuation multiplier. That shift compressed supply instantly. Gem-quality Alexandrite from any source is rare, but verified Russian material, tied to the earliest discoveries and imperial-era heritage, became a narrower subset within an already narrow category. The pivot was psychological but measurable. Once the trade recognized that documented Russian origin stones were finite in a way newer deposits were not, pricing logic recalibrated. Two stones with similar color change could sit in entirely different tiers depending on provenance. Nothing new was discovered underground. Nothing catastrophic removed supply. The market simply decided that history mattered. And when history becomes a filter, supply contracts without geology changing at all. Alexandrite demonstrates a different kind of overnight value shift, one driven by origin authority. The stone itself retained its chemistry, its optical structure, its chromium-driven color mechanics. What intensified was the premium attached to documented beginnings. A subtle but powerful question emerges. If two gemstones behave identically under light, but one carries verified origin from a depleted historical source, which one does the market consider rarer? In Alexandrite's case, the answer reshaped pricing almost immediately. Rarity did not increase in mineral terms. It concentrated in provenance. And when provenance narrows, value follows quickly. Ranked 4th, Painite. Painite did not explode in value because a mine closed. It shifted because a number escaped into the world. Discovered in Myanmar in the 1950s, Painite is a complex borate mineral containing zirconium, an unusual combination in gem-quality material. For decades, only a tiny handful of crystals were documented. Most were small, many were unsuitable for faceting. Within mineralogical circles, the stone was respected for its chemistry. Outside those circles, it was nearly unknown. Then the statistic began to circulate. Fewer than a few dozen gem-quality specimens confirmed worldwide. That figure was precise, repeatable, dramatic, and once repeated often enough, in gemological reports, trade publications, and eventually mainstream articles. It reframed Painite overnight. It was no longer a technical curiosity. It became the rarest gemstone on Earth in the public imagination. The Earth had not reduced supply. The public had discovered the number. Dealers who previously priced Painite cautiously began reassessing. Collectors who had never encountered the name began asking about it specifically. Auction descriptions emphasized the documented specimen count. The narrative concentrated into a single axis. Statistical rarity. That is a powerful compression. In most gemstones, value is a blend of beauty, durability, and cultural history. Painite's pivot was simpler. It was mathematical. When buyers internalize that global supply can be counted in tens rather than thousands, behavior changes quickly. Demand reacts faster than extraction ever could. Eventually, additional deposits were located in Myanmar, increasing the number of known crystals beyond the earliest counts. But the psychological anchor had already formed. Painite was now associated with extreme rarity in a way that outpaced the updated data. And once a gemstone is mentally categorized as ultra-rare, that label lingers. This was not a geological shock, it was an informational shock. Painite did not become rarer overnight. It became widely known to be rare overnight, and that distinction is critical. Markets built on scarcity respond most strongly not to quiet rarity, but to visible rarity. When a number becomes part of a gemstone's identity, it reshapes expectation. It reframes negotiation. It alters how collectors compare it against other species. Painite's value shift was not driven by color, durability, or even aesthetics. It was driven by countability. And once rarity can be expressed as a small number, the market rarely ignores it. Ranked third, Tanzanite. Tanzanite never needed a myth to look expensive. It had a built-in optical argument. A blue-violet zoisite colored by vanadium, it can flash different faces of itself depending on direction and lighting. A vivid pleochroism that makes the stone feel almost engineered. But for decades, the market treated Tanzanite like a reliable pipeline. A rare gemstone, yes, yet one that could be sourced, stocked, and replenished. That assumption was the weakness, because Tanzanite is not rare in the usual sense. It is rare in a more fragile way, single-source rare. Its commercial supply comes from a narrow mining region in northern Tanzania, a geological accident with no meaningful equivalent deposit known elsewhere. In other words, it isn't just a gemstone, it's a location. When mining restrictions tightened and the conversation around controlled production became public, the market's relationship with time changed. The trigger was not a new discovery underground. It was a new certainty above ground. Supply was not merely limited, it was politically and geographically compressible. That is when value can shift quickly. Markets do not need a mine to close to reprice. They only need to believe the clock is real. Once that belief settles in, inventory already in circulation is reinterpreted. A stone sitting in a dealer's tray becomes something else, a piece of a finite event. The overnight change was psychological, but it produced immediate behaviors. Tighter holding, more cautious selling, and faster premium attachment to better color and larger sizes. Because scarcity always concentrates upward. The top tier detaches first. The nice stones remain available. The truly exceptional ones become suddenly difficult to replace. And that replacement fear is what drives the shift. Tanzanite's story exposes a quiet rule of rarity. A gemstone can exist in quantity and still behave like it is disappearing if the path from ground to market is narrow enough. The stone did not become rarer overnight. The market simply stopped believing it was renewable. That belief changes everything. Because once a gemstone is understood as single source and time limited, every purchase becomes a decision against future uncertainty, not just a decision for beauty. The chemistry stayed the same. The light performance stayed the same. Only the horizon moved closer. Ranked second, Paraiba Tourmaline. Before the tests, it was just another Tourmaline. Vivid, yes. Electric even. But still part of a large familiar family. Tourmaline exists in many colors. Pink, green, blue, bicolor. And the market was accustomed to variation. Intense hues were admired. But they were not automatically redefined as a new category. Then the laboratory results came back. Trace analysis revealed something unusual. Copper. Not as a minor impurity, but as a defining chromophore. That copper content was responsible for the almost neon blue to green glow that seemed to emit light rather than reflect it. The discovery did not change the stone's appearance. It changed its identity. And identity resets value. Once copper-bearing material from Brazil's Paraiba state was confirmed as chemically distinct, the trade did something decisive. It separated the stones. Paraiba Tourmaline stopped being a descriptive phrase and became a classification. That shift was fast. Dealers who had previously priced these stones within the broader Tourmaline spectrum began repositioning them as a separate rarity tier. Auction houses emphasized copper-bearing origin. Collectors recalculated comparisons, not against other tourmalines, but against elite colored gemstones. The Earth had produced the same crystals the day before, but the market now understood them differently. Reclassification compresses supply instantly. Not every blue tourmaline qualifies. Not even every vivid one does. Only those with confirmed copper content and the unmistakable electric saturation belong in the Paraiba category. Overnight, the pool narrowed. The phenomenon demonstrates a powerful rule within rare gemstones. When chemistry introduces exclusivity, pricing follows quickly. A new subcategory with measurable distinction can detach from its parent species and behave as a market of its own. Paraiba tourmaline did not become beautiful overnight. It became chemically exceptional overnight. That distinction elevated it beyond aesthetic appeal. It anchored rarity in laboratory confirmation, something objective, documentable, defensible. Once buyers understood that copper-bearing material was both visually unique and geographically limited, demand reacted accordingly. This was not a media rumor. It was a scientific revelation, and scientific revelation can move faster than mining cycles. Paraiba tourmaline's value shift was not driven by mythology or nostalgia. It was driven by validation. The moment the trade accepted copper as the defining factor, the gemstone detached from its broader family and entered a narrower, more concentrated tier of rarity. When identity changes, markets reprice. And few identity shifts have been as decisive as this one. In first place, red diamond. Most diamonds are sorted by the familiar scale, D to Z, clarity, cut, carat. Red does not sit comfortably within that system. For decades, colored diamonds were treated as fascinating variations, yellows, pinks, blues, each driven by trace elements or structural irregularities within the carbon lattice. But red diamonds resisted easy explanation. Their color is not caused by chemical impurities in the conventional sense. It is widely attributed to extreme lattice distortion within the crystal structure, a deformation so rare that it appears only under extraordinary geological stress. That mechanism alone would make them unusual. What changed the market was something simpler: countability. As auction houses and major grading laboratories began documenting confirmed natural red diamonds, the global numbers became visible. Not hundreds, not thousands. A tiny handful of stones of meaningful size, many under 1 carat, few with pure, saturated red without secondary modifiers. The statistic landed quietly at first. Then it settled. Collectors realized that unlike other fancy colors, red diamonds were not merely scarce. They were statistically anomalous. Even among colored diamonds, they occupied an extreme fringe of probability. The Earth had always formed them rarely. The market had not fully internalized how rarely. When that realization spread, reinforced by high-profile auction results and careful certification, perception compressed instantly. Red diamonds were no longer compared within the broader fancy color spectrum. They were treated as an exception to it. This was not a discovery shock. It was a mathematical one. The shift did not require a new mine collapse. It did not require fresh geological data. It required the acknowledgement that global supply could be expressed not in production estimates, but in individual stones. And when rarity can be measured in pieces rather than parcels, behavior changes. Dealers tighten hold positions. Auction descriptions emphasize provenance and certification. Collectors stopped viewing red diamonds as another fancy color and began treating them as geological outliers. That psychological pivot carries weight, because in rare gemstones, scarcity is powerful, but anomaly is stronger. Scarcity suggests limited supply. Anomaly suggests improbability, something that should barely exist at all. Red diamonds did not become rarer overnight. They became understood as exceptional overnight. And once a gemstone is recognized not just as rare, but as statistically extraordinary Within an already rare category, value no longer behaves normally. It concentrates. 10 gemstones, 10 shifts, not driven by sudden beauty, not driven by sudden discovery, driven by understanding. In every case today, the earth stayed the same. What changed was interpretation. A definition tightened. An origin gained weight. A statistic became visible. A category narrowed. And when information sharpens, markets react. That is the quiet force behind rare gemstones. Not mythology, not rumor, not speculation. Clarity. Because value does not always rise when something becomes rarer. Sometimes it rises when people finally recognize how rare it already was. Now here's a question worth considering. Which of these shifts felt the most inevitable, and which one felt the most surprising? Was it the tightening of definitions, the power of origin, the shock of a global specimen count? Leave your perspective below. Not which stone you would choose, but which mechanism you believe moves markets fastest. Scientific correction, geographic limitation, or statistical anomaly?